Good evening. Today is Monday, 29th January 2018. I'm Ebony Brandon. This is the SKN News Now Evening Edition. In the headlines tonight, nationally, police are investigating the circumstances surrounding Shaquille Pemberton's death. Internationally, the African Union Summit has concluded discussions centering on corruption and conflict across the continent. And in sport, Cricket West Indies has announced new contracts, which means a higher payday for West Indies players. We have the details of these stories, the weather and Carib update in tonight's edition of SKN News Now. Police are well into the investigation of yet another mysterious death. Over the weekend, the body of 23-year-old Shaquille Pemberton was found in Giard's Meadows. Pemberton was a bellman at the Park Hyatt Resort. Alarms were reportedly raised by the family and the hotel after the young man went out of contact and failed to show up for work. His body was discovered by a passerby who reported it to the St. Kitts and Nevis Fire and Rescue Services. The case was then taken over by the Royal St. Christopher and Nevis Police Force. Authorities have not yet indicated a cause of death or categorized Pemberton's death. However, they have confirmed earlier word that there were injuries to his chest. Should the autopsy on his body reveal that he fell victim to foul play, Shaquille Pemberton will become the Federation's third homicide victim and the first to be recorded on St. Kitts this year. There has been an outpouring of sympathy, grief, and also anger on social media over this latest incident. Pemberton's co-workers at the Park Hyatt have described him as mild-mannered and a little brother. Other family members have also expressed the belief that the young man may have been kidnapped and tortured before his body was hidden not far from the Robert L. Bradshaw International Airport Control Tower. Meanwhile, 52-year-old Wayne Spire Chapman has been charged for the murder of his girlfriend, 45-year-old Shirley Dawn Morton. The Bucks Hill Hanleys Road man was taken into police custody last Thursday, 4 days after Miss Morton's body was found inside his home. After Chapman could not be found, police appealed to the public for assistance finding him, as at the time he was being considered a person of interest. Chapman, a diabetic, was discovered in Taylor's pasture, Gingerland, on Thursday morning in need of medical attention. An autopsy carried out last Monday determined that Morton died as a result of brain injury caused by multiple blunt force traumas. This charge of murder against Chapman brings the country's official homicides for 2018 to 2. In other news, former People's Action Movement Chairman Chesley Hamilton is the latest to condemn Speaker of the National Assembly, Honorable Michael Perkins' handling of affairs in the House. The attorney at law said it is clear that the Speaker is part of efforts to stifle free debate in the National Assembly, and in doing so has brought the office of the Speaker and the Parliament into disrepute. Hamilton also observed how often Speaker Perkins plays an active role in the House's proceedings instead of maintaining an impartial role, which he likened to that of a referee. This, he went on, has to come to an end. Hamilton said that by entering the political frame, the National Assembly, Speaker Perkins acts in a manner which is unbecoming of his office and by his very conduct brings the Parliament into disrepute. The lawyer also alluded to the matter of the motion of no confidence the opposition brought against the Speaker in 2017, saying that the Speaker cannot be the advocate and arbitrator in his own matter simply because he's in the Parliament. He also criticized the Speaker's handling of the flawed suspension of the opposition leader, Right Honourable Dr. Denzil Douglas from the National Assembly last Tuesday, saying that it gives the appearance of bias when the Speaker actively calls on members of the House to move or request that the House move a motion. Describing the present situation as a sad state of affairs, Hamilton added that the Speaker needs to be more impartial and make more of an effort to work along with the opposition members of the House. Mr. Hamilton explained that he was particularly passionate about this matter as he was part of the fight to change the former Labour administration over the very same issues now rearing their heads in a government he worked to bring to power. And coaches from the departments of sport in St. Kitts and Nevis participated in a one-day workshop today at the St. Kitts Marriott Resort. The workshop is intended to sharpen the coach's ability to identify cases of possible child abuse and provide assistance to the victims. The OECS Communication Strategy for Child Abuse in Sports is organized by the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States Commission and the United Nations Children Fund. During the launch of the communication strategy, the importance of moving in this direction was outlined by OECS Program Officer Yoshibel Durand.
The OECS Commission over the past few years has been working on a protection strategy for child abuse in the region. As part of this strategy, we created a component for communication in sports because we realize sports, not only is it a huge unifier, but it is one of the aspects of our region which has gone sadly underdeveloped for a few years. We're hoping through this strategy to bring awareness to the various aspects of sports, not just winning a gold medal, but also taking into consideration the well-being of the persons who play sports.
Dr. Grace Ann Cornwall, head of the Social Development Unit of the OECS Commission, further expounded on the necessity of creating additional protections for children throughout the region, and particularly in the area of sport.
Our children and youth in the OECS are our main assets. And for this reason, the OECS, through the Social Development Unit, recognizes that this engagement is congruent with the OECS's fourth strategic objective, which is assuring the security and well-being of our citizens. As an organization, we welcome this particular challenge as we empower our young people and those who aid in the building of their self-esteem and shaping their future. The key instruments of this empowerment within our unit, or the unit in which I lead, is one, our youth strategy, and the other, our planned sports policy. The youth strategy is premised on several pillars on which child youth protection is one area of focus. And the region's sports strategy is absolutely important because with a sports strategy or a sports policy being implemented, it will help to harness the creative geniuses in our region. And these creative geniuses are our sporting administrators, coaches, and prospective winning athletes.
Dr. Cornwall also examined the close relationship young athletes share with their coaches and athletic training team, and why it's necessary for these persons to have adequate training, which will allow them to identify and intervene in cases where children may be vulnerable to abuse.
Apart from motivation and membership provided by coaches, there is a recognition that these relationships have some negative implications at times. And oftentimes, there are sources of embarrassment for our children, our families, and the sporting arena. Some matters are publicized, while some suffer in silence. In keeping with the Convention on the Rights of the Child and national legislation, which treats with care and protection of our children, the region must take every opportunity to engage in child safeguarding. That is, keeping all children safe from harm, abuse, violence, exploitation, and wanton neglect. Having effective child safeguarding measures in place means that our clubs and schools are proactively working internally and externally to ensure that the best welfare of our children is taken care of. In contrast, Child protection is protecting a child that has been identified as being at risk and harm of violence. In keeping with this, all children have the right to participate, enjoy, and develop through sports in a safe and inclusive environment, free from all forms of abuse, violence, and exploitation. Children have the right to have their voices heard and listened to. They need to know that where they can turn when they have a concern about participating in sports.
Among the topics addressed today at the workshop were child protection versus child abuse, the review of the child protection pretest, and a draft child protection plan. And finally, this evening, 28 junior officers, 26 from St. Kitts and Nevis Customs and Excise Department and 2 from Her Majesty's Customs and Excise Department of Montserrat, have begun 8 weeks of training as part of the 12th Annual Caribbean Customs Law Enforcement Council's Junior Officers Basic Training Course, or CCLAC. The course, which began today and ends on March 2nd, will cover a host of topics, including trade facilitation and the role of customs, diplomatic and consular rights and privileges, arrest, detention and seizures, criminal investigation awareness, plant quarantine and toxic chemicals, ozone-depleting substances, Montreal Protocol, communication, integrity, risk assessment, and passenger and baggage search. Sessions will be conducted by the Department of Agriculture, Ministry of Trade, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and by retired Assistant Commissioner of Police Joseph Richardson. The Caribbean Customs Law Enforcement Council was established as an informal association of customs administrations within the Caribbean region during the early 1970s. To date, CCLAC has 39 members that span the Caribbean region and has extended its reach to Latin America, North America, and Europe. Its principal objectives in its early years were to exchange information on smuggling and help the smaller regional administrations adjust to the new threat of organized drug trafficking throughout the region. In the 1990s, the training subgroup for CCLAC recognized the need for a formalized training program for junior customs officers in the Caribbean. And that wraps up again our national developments this evening. Stay with us. SKN News Now continues in just a moment with international developments. The two-day African Union Summit has just closed in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. Representatives of 55 African nations have been focusing on tackling corruption and conflict across the continent. The leaders also discussed different ways to fund the African Union. Mohamed Adao reports.
The African Union Summit ended with a tough warning to those fighting in the conflict in South Sudan. African Union Chairman Musa Faki Mohammed says it's time to slap sanctions on anyone blocking peace in the country. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who attended the summit, promised support for the African Union and put the warring parties on notice.
In the meeting we had yesterday, there is a very strong commitment of the IGAD, of the African Union, to both the need to guarantee the success of the revitalization forum in relation to the peace agreement, but also to make sure that the cessation of hostilities is respected, and it was clear that if it is not respected, tougher measures need to be taken.
It wasn't the only conflict discussed at the summit though. The war in Libya, the fight against Boko Haram in West Africa, and conflict in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo were all debated by the AU Peace and Security Council. On Somalia, the Pan-African body is hoping the UN Security Council listens to its calls for an extension of the mandate of its flagship peacekeeping mission, AMISOM, beyond June this year. A hasty withdrawal, the AU fears, could open the door to an Al-Shabaab takeover of the Somali capital, Mogadishu. Behind closed doors at the African Union headquarters, itself a gift from the Chinese government, African leaders discussed the need to do away with the begging bowl syndrome. They increasingly want to see an African Union fully funded by its members and have devised a plan that calls on member states to levy 0.2% on imports to fund the union. But so far, just 21 of the 55 member states have implemented it.
This reform is existential for the organization. Unless we can fund our own organization, we have no right to ask foreign taxpayers to fund the African Union.
Rwandan President Paul Kagame has taken over the leadership of the AU General Assembly. He is expected to use his year at the helm to push through the agenda he developed for a more independent AU. On the theme of the summit tackling rampant corruption in Africa, leaders named Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari as the AU's first anti-corruption champion. It's a move seen as a recognition of his efforts to fight graft in Nigeria.
Thousands of union workers from the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees are protesting in Gaza against planned budget cuts. They are concerned that the budget cuts will mean cutting services and ending contracts for thousands of UNRWA's workers in the region. It follows the United States' decision to cut millions of dollars worth of funding to the aid agency. Imran Khan reports.
This was one of the largest demonstrations Gaza has seen in recent months. The union organizing says 13,000 people turned out. Palestinians are angry that the US is withholding $110 million in funding for the United Nations Relief Works Agency. That agency is responsible for Palestinian refugees, some 1 million in Gaza alone. The agency itself is in crisis mode. It's introduced austerity measures and warns it only has 2 months of funding left.
After that, all the services will stop. All the Palestinian refugees will be affected. There will be no food, there will be no coupon, there will be no health services, there will be no education for these kids, which are looking to be as kids in other parts of the world. All Palestinians in Gaza Strip are under siege, which is a very, very serious situation.
It's some of Gaza's most desperate that will be hit hardest. People like Hussam Ali Hissi, who receives unemployment payments from UNRWA. He supports a family of 6. Those payments are due to come to an end if money isn't found.
If
UNRWA stops this project, then where can I go in Gaza? How can I feed my children? How can I raise them? In Gaza, there is no other choice. Construction has stopped and we are under siege. There is no option other than UNRWA. Without it, there is nothing.
UNRWA says a humanitarian crisis is coming. Experts in the business community are already warning that the Gazan economy is on the verge of collapse. Now, some 70% of Gaza live in refugee camps like this, and they're the ones that are going to be the most affected. That's almost half of the population of Gaza.
Still straight ahead in tonight's edition of SKN News Now, sport, the weather, and Carib update. Cricket West Indies has enhanced its central retainer contract system for men's players. According to Cricket West Indies, the new arrangement brings the CWI central retainer contract system more in line with the different formats of the sport, splitting the senior international men's players into 3 groups: all format contracts, red ball contracts, and white ball contracts. Chief Executive Officer CWI Johnny Grave added that the new retainer contracts aim to incentivize players to play cricket for the West Indies and to be contracted to Cricket West Indies. He went on that all new contracts offer increased remuneration to West Indies men's players, as well as enhanced medical and insurance policies. The process of selecting players was completed back in July, ahead of the domestic contracts being issued to the 90 regional professional cricketers on August 1st. While the new West Indies men's contracts will officially run from October 2017 to September 2018, the new retainers will be offered to the Windies men's team and regional players on 1st July 2018, so that all professional cricketers start new contracts on the same date. Graves also noted that these new contracts will embrace additional terms and conditions which will set out the responsibilities of both player and CWI to each other, together with ensuring that the players are contractually bound to new and existing policies that aim to further increase standards. All future contracts for all professional cricketers will start on the same date, July 1st, which will become the start of the cricketing year. Under the new arrangement, the Cricket West Indies selection panel will be able to award up to 11 all-format contracts and up to an aggregate of 11 red and white ball contracts to a maximum of 18 contracts in total, not including development. Up to 4 new development contracts can also be offered to players in both red and white ball categories for those who are yet to fully establish themselves in the starting 11s and therefore not secured a full retainer contract but are likely to be selected in the year ahead. The list of retained players are in all format contracts: Jason Holder, Shannon Gabriel, Shai Hope, Azari Joseph, Devendra Bishu. In red ball contracts, Craig Brathwaite, Roston Chase, Shane Dorwich, Jermaine Blackwood, Miguel Cummings, Jamel Warakan, Shimron Hetmeyer, Kieran Powell, and Vishal Singh. In white ball contracts, Carlos Brathwaite, Ashley Nurse, Jason Mohammed, Elvin Lewis, Rovman Powell, and Kesrick Williams. Cricket West Indies says the list of retained female players will soon be announced. And now for a look at this evening's weather forecast. Over St. Kitts and Nevis tonight, we can expect partly cloudy conditions with a moderate chance of a brief evening shower. Seas remain very rough with heights of between 10 to 14 feet. Warnings for small craft operators and sea bathers remain in effect against dangerous marine conditions, and mariners are advised to avoid the waters. The seas will begin to slowly subside tonight. Winds are east to northeasterly at average speeds of between 17 to 23 miles per hour over land, increasing to an average of between 21 to 29 miles per hour over coastal waters and elevated terrain, and gusting higher in squally conditions, mainly over coastal waters. The winds as well will begin to subside tonight. The sea level pressure is 1014.8 millibars or 29.96 inches. The sun will rise tomorrow at 6:28 a.m. And that brings us to the end of this evening's news presentation. Before we go, a recap of this evening's top stories. Nationally, police are investigating the circumstances surrounding Shaquille Pemberton's death. Internationally, the African Union Summit has concluded discussions centering on corruption and conflict across the continent. And in sport, Cricket West Indies has announced new contracts, which means a higher payday for West Indies players. Thank you so much for tuning in. I've been your presenter, Ebony Brandon. Still to come in just a moment, Carib Update followed by DJ Yardi.